This educational video was funded by a grant from the South Florida Water Management District. Not far from Orlando, Florida's tourist mecca, lies a tranquil tract of land, undisturbed by humans, yet troubled by encroaching development. Once an island in the ocean, it was surrounded by nothing but water. Now it sits amid one of the fastest growing regions in the United States. Its dry, desert-like environs date back to a time before man walked the earth. This scrubland, as it's called, represents a truly ancient territory with a personality all its own. And with the help of caring citizens, it will continue to thrive through the coming centuries.
In 1987, we had an opportunity to visit this site for the first time. And at that time, we saw a for sale sign on the front gate, and it was platted for over 300 single-family residences as part of the original Poinciana development. We were struck by the uniqueness of the scrub habitat itself, and we wanted to do whatever we could to try to preserve it. And again, we looked at lots of different options. We looked at different agencies that had funding mechanisms to preserve the property because we felt it was very worthy of preservation. And because it's close to a developing area in Central Florida, we knew it had a lot of potential for environmental education.
Since his first days as a teacher in the late 1970s, David Snedeker has wanted to make a difference on this planet. Through his effort and the efforts of many others, this 120-acre site was saved from the blades of the bulldozer in 1995. The South Florida Water Management District purchased the land during a much larger acquisition of nearby lands in the Reedy Creek area. This agency now allows the Osceola County Public School System to manage the scrub site. Now, as director of the Environmental Study Center, David shares what he's learned about this fragile scrub, inspiring a new generation to follow his path by first stepping back in time. It's hard to imagine that most of the Florida peninsula was once underwater, all except a few scattered ridges of sand in the center of the state, now known as the Lake Wales Ridge. That was about 25 million years ago. During the course of time, Mother Nature used the rising and falling of sea levels to sculpt new islands of sand. Over time, repetitive wave and wind action piled sand up to form shorelines, dunes, and ridges that were high and dry, untouched by water. As the seas continued to lower, additional ridges of sand formed, creating younger desert islands.
So the scrubs on the Lake Wales Ridge have been in existence longer than scrubs at lower elevations. But we know that during the last ice age, about 20,000 years ago, sea level again retreated to about 350 feet below the present level. And at that time, apparently scrub habitats was extremely widespread in peninsular and central Florida. That was the predominant vegetation type. And then starting, say, 13,000 years ago, sea level started to rise. And as they rose, water tables rose, and former scrubs were obliterated by other habitats. And so we were left with patches of scrub usually on old sandbars or old dune systems where the soils were particularly well drained. And this scrub at this site is an example of one of those scrubs that was sort of offshore of the Lake Wales Ridge.
As the seas receded down the Kissimmee Valley, the Kissimmee River was formed, and as the sea level dropped, more dune lines were created, and these stretch along Route 441 all the way to where the Kissimmee River discharges into Lake Okeechobee. So we could say that the whole Kissimmee River Valley has been under the sea and has a series of historic dune lines associated with that, this being one in the very upper end of the Kissimmee River Valley.
Encompassing almost 120 acres, this state treasure is located just east of the Lake Wales Ridge, near two protected areas, the Reedy Creek Swamp and the Disney Wilderness Preserve. Its landscape is about 65 feet above sea level compared to the more ancient shrubs along the Lake Wales Ridge, which are between 200 and 250 feet high. These elevations tell scientists that the Osceola site is much younger because of a lower sea level. The forces of nature continue to mold our landscapes even now. Experts say that the sea rose between 6 and 8 inches just in the last 100 years. So who knows what changes are in store? A sandy terrain, scorched by the intense Florida sun, finds little relief from rain. The water quickly runs through the loose, porous soil. What could possibly survive here? Surprisingly, an active community of well-adjusted inhabitants call this harsh environment home.
Scrub plant, some of the things that the adaptations that this has.
More than half of the plants and animals that live in scrub communities are found nowhere else in the world.
That's going to give it some help in keeping moisture in. That waxy coat.
Because of the geological history of the peninsula and the fluctuation in sea levels with scrubs becoming isolated during higher stands of sea, it turns out that the scrub is a hotbed of evolution. When you isolate populations and then subject them to harsh environments, dry conditions, high heat, they either evolve adaptations to survive or they go extinct. And so we find that many plants and some animals in the scrub have evolved special adaptations to exist in this, to us at least, a harsh environment.
Native scrub plants, such as this rosemary, usually have small, tough leaves, which will help conserve water. And plants often embed their roots very deeply into the sand, or develop a very extensive fine root system to quench their thirst. Many coat themselves with a wax, a sunscreen of sorts, to prevent water evaporation from their leaves. Think of scrub as a miniature desert, where even cactus plants like this prickly pear don't grow very large. But the scrub does offer an assortment of meals to nourish a thriving wildlife population. A blend of algae and fungus, known as lichens, blanket large areas of the dry land. The most common of these at the scrub site is deer moss. These graceful animals often consume acorns from the scrub oak trees, and sometimes they enjoy snacking on plant leaves or palmetto berries. Likewise, birds and fox squirrels gnaw on the feast of acorns ready for the taking. The gopher tortoise often prefers plant leaves for its diet. This species of special concern tunnels a home deep within the sand, sometimes as long as 30 feet. Here it can escape from the powerful sun. This animal tends to be a homebody, rarely straying far from its burrow. Generously, the tortoise shares its home with others, including snakes such as this indigo. Lizards that live in the scrub dart in and out of the ground cover, blending in with vegetation to protect themselves from predators such as birds. They rely on insects such as ants and grasshoppers, beetles and crickets and spiders for a quick meal. Spiders set up an intricate trap to catch their prey, including flies, moths, and other unsuspecting victims. 3 species typically found in scrub are missing from our scrub site. One is the scrub jay, a beautiful blue bird that requires a large amount of land to roam, feed, and breed. Black bears are missing as well. And the same is true for panthers. At one time, bears and panthers did survive on this Osceola County site. Scientists don't know for sure, but they think scrub jays may have existed here too. But nearby development could have reduced their habitat, eventually wiping them out. Nonetheless, the abundant life currently here can continue to thrive with proper protection. Part of that includes fire ecology. As unbelievable as it may seem, scrub depends on fire to replenish itself. Government workers actually set control burns when needed to reduce overgrowth and dead vegetation. These flames help to regenerate the grasses that many animals need for food.
Fire is very important for the management of land anywhere in the state of Florida, whether it's pine flatwoods or scrub. It's very important because what happens is you get this accumulation of decaying, dying material such as leaves and branches and twigs. As that stuff begins to build up on the forest floor here, when a fire does come through, the more fuel that is here, the more leaves and twigs, the hotter the fire is and the more damage that fire causes to the larger trees that we see growing in here. Government uses fire as a tool for managing the intensity of the fire.
Without healthy plant life, the animals of this community would not survive. Scrub plants and animals don't rely on rain as much as others do. So what happens to all that water after making its run through the porous sand? It's similar to water droplets running through a sieve. Most of the precipitation flows into aquifers beneath the Earth's surface. These act as large storage bins that collect and save rainwater.
Here in Central Florida, the water that we drink comes out of the Floridan aquifer. That's basically the sponge that is underground, a formation of rock that holds our fresh water here that we extract for drinking water purposes. It's pretty unique because here in Central Florida, the aquifer becomes very close to the surface of the ground. That's evidenced by the sinkholes and the seeps that we have here in Central Florida.
The water in this Floridan aquifer is contained in limestone formations under the Osceola County area. Although most of the rain falling on the Osceola scrub rushes through the sand, some makes it directly into nearby Reedy Creek and Lake Russell. These 2 water bodies drain into the Kissimmee River. From there, the water travels into Lake Okeechobee and eventually reaches the Everglades in South Florida. The Osceola scrub is surrounded by pine flatwoods, which hold water runoff above the surface and allow it to spread out and down the Everglades. That water level is significant because it helps to sustain wetlands, wildlife, and vegetation from Central to South Florida.
When we check the organisms, we want to see if there's a nice diversity of organisms here. A lot of the little...
These Osceola County students are discovering the link between the Scrub Island, Reedy Creek, and its neighboring waterways to the south.
eventually this water, it goes into the Kissimmee, Okeechobee, Everglades system, and we want to make sure that it starts out clean, so when it goes and it gets into the Everglades, it's not all dirty and doesn't have like litter and stuff in it.
Each element in the Kissimmee-Okeechobee Everglades system has a valuable role to play in this interconnected web, and each depends on the others to function as Mother Nature designed. Scrubland happens to be the oldest ecosystem in the Southeast, yet it's disappearing faster than any other habitat in the United States. That's because the land drains well, making it attractive to developers. Sadly, nearly 85% of Florida scrub has been cleared for citrus groves, housing, or other development. These landowners often use chemicals that can contaminate waterways and groundwater. Most rainwater has nowhere to go except into storm drains and ultimately into our lakes and rivers. Pavement and rooftops prevent much water from percolating through the ground to replenish our aquifers. Even back in the 1940s, large portions of scrublands surrounding Reedy Creek had already been influenced by humans, who converted them to citrus and pasture lands. But very little urban development existed then, as shown here by the large green tracts of untouched lands.
As you can see, these contiguous green spaces have diminished and become fragmented by various land uses and road networks over the past 50 years. Most of southwestern Orlando and western Kissimmee, western Osceola County, is now urbanized, and even this somewhat isolated scrub site is being impacted by human activity. There were about 76,000 acres originally in Florida of scrub and scrubby flatwoods and sandhill communities. Of that 76,000, there's about 10,000 left. Over 4/5 of the scrub vegetation has been lost.
In fact, scrub is the most endangered habitat in Florida. As these lands have developed, many of the paths and corridors animals used to roam for feeding and breeding have been closed off. These creatures have nowhere to go, and their food sources have been destroyed. Poinciana Boulevard parallels Reedy Creek and acts as a barrier to many animals as they migrate from wetland habitat near the creek to the drier uplands and scrub located on the other side of the highway. Just to the northeast of our scrub island, the Pleasant Hill Road corridor is under development. So, the effects of nearby growth can certainly be felt in this treasure from the past. But preservation efforts are underway, such as the rescue of this scrub from residential development. It's now part of the Reedy Creek, Marion Creek, and Upper Kissimmee River Basin, which was designated as Greenway by the state of Florida in 1995. That designation recognizes the area as a connected ecological system worthy of conservation.
This wildlife corridor that we've created, I think is a great thing for Osceola County. It's a great greenway. It's like a super highway for animals, as I look at it. Man has his super highways. Why shouldn't animals have their own?
A lot of animals live here that can't live anywhere else except for in hot, dry climates. And I think that it's important to protect them because soon they'll become endangered, and then after that they'll become extinct and we'll never see them again.
Because if we destroy all this land, then our children and our grandchildren won't get to know a place like this.
If this is gone, all the animals that live here and only here will all be dead and will mess up the food chain.
Conservation of scrub habitat in Florida is essential to maintaining one of the nation's most endangered natural communities. And now, the torch is passed from one generation to the next, never allowing the flame to extinguish.